So first, I'm gonna tell y'all like a quick story. This is something that my ancestors been really kicking my butt to talk about. Okay, this invisible church. Okay, so I come from people on my dad's side that was slaves, right? And the same thing on my mom's dad's side. They come from people that was slaves, but they was indigenous, but they was enslaved. Okay, and they used to say the only people that believed in Christianity was people that wanted to get married to other slaves, people who wanted to get off of work on Sundays, because if not, you had to work. Okay. And like people that wanted certain benefits, because when you were considered Christian of a Christian disposition, you was considered trustworthy because you operated from the rules of the Lord and you obey your master. Does this make sense? Because remember, the slave Bible is different from the Bible that we have with 66 books, right? Everybody know that, right? If not, look that up. Okay, so the invisible church came about when enslaved African Americans, indigenous Indians were informal to Christian groups, right? They basically were enslaved people listened to preachers that they chose without their slaveholders' knowledge. Invisible churches taught a different message from white controlled churches, and it didn't emphasize obedience to slave masters. Some slaves could not contact invisible churches, and others did not agree with the invisible church's message, but many slaves comfort by the invisible churches. And this how the hoodoo and shit came about, right? So invisible churches was a branch of Christian churches and slave community in the colonial history of the United States and the antebellum period, where slave African Americans secretly practiced their own version of Christianity. Remember, I keep telling y'all, white Jesus is different from black Jesus. And remember, I told y'all Charlie Kirk's death showed y'all that y'all's Jesus was different from theirs. Remember, I kept saying that? So this invisible church, what they did was they took enslaved Africans practice hoodoo, and hoodoo is a spiritual tradition defined by folk religion. It was created by enslaved Africans during slavery in colonial America for their protection against their enslavers. And they started doing West African and Central African, and they mixed it with Christianity. Okay, so the scholars would know about them practicing hoodoo in these churches or these invisible institutions, and they portrayed to be like they was Christian, right? So it was a different level of spirituality that was going on with the slaves on the on the compounds in their consciousness. So the slave traders began to forbid free black people from practicing African religions. So they had to start hiding all of the stuff that they was doing. This is how certain African religions became synchronized with Catholic saints and stuff like this. Does this make sense? And this was during the time of the slave code. So when you hear people say why initiation is so important, this is why, because they kept traditions alive with the bare minimums. This is how you get your leukemia and your all these different santerias and the hoodoos and the folk magic, and you see what I'm saying? All of this, the mixture. This is the hodgepodge, right? That's how it all began to break up, because they had to hide the invisible church with inside of the church. Even in Louisiana, they call Code de Nord in French colonial Louisiana, which prohibited and made it illegal for enslaved Africans to practice these traditions. Okay, Article 3 in Code de Nord states we forbid any public exercises of religion other than Catholic. So now you see why they hid the voodoo with the saints. You see how that go? So the core they nor and the slave resulted in enslaved Africans to conduct their spiritual practice, and what this is the invisible church. But the churches basically had a controversy with this invisible institution, right? Certain black churches and different risings and all the secret locations, all this stuff, right? So they had, since this was during slavery, like these people aren't free doing all this shit, right? They had to be quiet about it, because if not, they was getting punished. They had killed him. Okay, unalive them for having these. They had like these wild punishments, but some of them would revolt and go into riots. Some of them they caught them going into possession, like the Gullah Geechee people that's really from Sierra Leone and like all of that, and the Cape, d'Ivoire, all of this. They would catch them in Geechee land like possessed, eyes flipped back, all of them shaking in a circle around trees and shit, and they'd be hanging them. You see what I'm saying? That's a story that I learned. Like, that's the reason why some of, yeah. They don't fuck with the voodoo shit because somebody that we was related to, ever since they did something called the ring shout, it affected all the women, and that like it opened something. See, back in the day when you was doing hoodoo, the person that was teaching to you would take you out in the woods. In the woods and make you into that person, like if you had that energy on you. But they believe you had to have the Holy Ghost. That's some deep shit. I ain't gonna go all into that. And then it was a fixation of spiritual possession, herbs, animals, natural given abilities to manipulate energy. Basically, we're gonna sum it up like that. And you had all these different people that they'll tell you that they had these Hoodoo-nized version churches during this time, especially during the Underground Railroad and all around this time when slave revolts became popular. And you'll hear different people talk about the ring shout and the spiritual possession and the healing rituals and the messages of freedom from the spirit telling them to break free from slaveholders, okay? And the beginnings of the modern African church, it was somebody called George Freeman Bragg, right? And he wrote in historical journal his histories of the black Episcopal Church began as an invisible church during slavery during the Civil War. And other Christian denominations of African American churches began slavery and started as invisible churches. As time progressed, many African American churches became more Christian and less hoodoo and voodoo. That's why to this day you still have like these Church of Shangos, and you see what I'm saying? Church of this Orisha. So they come from stuff like that. Like people would say, oh no, it comes separate. All of it was mixed up. That's why everything is correlated with saints. If you practice voodoo, voodoo refer to saints. You could use saints to do your work. If you practice forms of Mexican magic, they use saints and archangels to do their work. That's why they were hiding it. This is how they hide it. So they even talk about it in the slave narratives. Look that up. This is a collection of recorded oral events and accounts from former enslaved people. They recorded this in the 1930s, okay? The Library of Congress has over 2,300 personal accounts from former slaves. And they talk about hoodoo, okay? And they talk about the white preacher and the obedience to the slave masters and don't steal your master's chicken, don't eat his meat. Like it got all this stuff in here. They talked about how they would go to church and they would pray in a certain way, whispering so no one could hear them, and they would be having their own church and saying their own words under their mind. Does that make sense? Because you wasn't supposed to be having that kind of church. So I just wanted to share that because I thought that was like some really good information. You don't really hear a lot of people talk about it. Shout out to Wikipedia for some of that information on the actual dates. But a lot of people will tell you that all these different things about hoodoo because there's so many ways to do it is because where the spirits from and how they're mixed, but it's a set of spiritual observances, traditions, and beliefs, magical rituals by enslaved African Americans in the southern states and different various traditional African spiritualities. These elements of indigenous and American botanical knowledge, the practitioners of hoodoos are called root workers, conjure men and women, root doctors, two-handed doctors, all these different synonyms and names for this spiritual system. But these beliefs have often been synced with beliefs such as Islam, Christianity, and forms of Catholicism. Okay, so these are just different beliefs of people from that area. So a lot of people don't know many hoodoo traditions come from Bakongo people, or what they and then other people called the Akan. The Bakongo people come from Central Africa. That was 52% allegedly of the people that came over here. Congo, Angola, Central Africa, the Republic, Gabon, all of this. Hoodoo came, that word didn't exist until 1870. So I want you to think about this. That word hoodoo, nobody was even saying no shit like that until the 1870s. So it was other words that was used for speaking of that dialect, but a hoodoo meant a spirit work, or Iwe was the language of the leaves that people would use, using the leaves. Okay, this word has so many different meanings, the hoodoo, but it really showed up a lot through the antebellum area. You know what I'm saying? Like around that time. You know what I'm saying? Do the antebellum. So Hoodoo was created by African Americans who were among over 12 million people that they considered that they had enslaved, and different ethnic groups from the 16th to the 19th century. Actual dates they have is 1514 to 1867. Atlantic slave trade is what they say in quotation. This was a part of American Black Holocaust Museum. They have that in there. They talk about the Bakongo religion, the Congo cosmogram, the Simbi, the Niski, the Meniski practices, the Voodoo, the Fan, and Iwe, people of Benin and Togo. Some elements of the Yoruba religions also was in this. Then you have the Christian faith, the indigenous botanical knowledge that's woven in this. The Gullah Geechee people from Southeast experienced this isolation among various traditional West African cultural practices. This is where you get your obeah, different things like that. You got your Mississippi Delta. This is the concentration of slaves, of people that Hoodoo was under extensive cover of secrecy. So everything is in quoted. It's like deep, what they would consider, like they talked about in the slave codes, like how deep they hid this information in songs and all types of stuff. So I wanted to kind of, like I said, I just wanted to share that information because a lot of people, we talk about Hoodoo, we talk about the spells, but we never really get into the history of how all of this and what it went through basically to survive. You know, people like W.E.B. Du Bois, these people kept it alive. You know what I mean? Just talking about it. You know, um, just all kind of people. I could go on, you know. They talk about the honey jars, how popular these was, sugar water, um, mojo bags in the 1830s, 1700s. Like they have access to finding all this stuff, or having Jamaican slaves, and they talk about Obi or Obeah, however they pronounce it, either way, depending on who you ask. Tomato, tomato. I'm not Jamaican, so I probably chopped that up terribly. They also talk about it in the Alabama slave narratives about enslaved people using the graveyard dirt to escape from slavery on the Underground Railroad, rubbing their feet on graveyard dirt on the bottom of their feet and putting graveyard dirt in their tracks to prevent slave catchers and people from catching their scent, and using different tricks to trick dogs like hush puppies. Um, it's all kind of stuff. Like you're gonna find a lot of different information when you look up these narratives. You have people like Frederick Douglass, who was an enslaved person. He became an abolitionist. All of these people had their ties into some form of mysticism. Pascal Beverly Randolph, he was an occultist. You see what I'm saying? All these people have these different ties, and I could go on. There's so many um people, Black Herman, these all these different people had these ties into keeping the Hoodoo alive, taking it through the Civil War. So we just gotta be you know, just grateful for that. That shit really survived through a lot of information. And we do have a lot of information that has been passed down to us from our family members, knowingly, unknowingly. A lot of things that we do are very hoodoo-licious. So I just wanted to share that little tidbit with everybody. Let me know if you're interested in more hoodoo history.